The night she gave away her last $10, the diner was almost empty. It was one of those slow evenings where the air felt tired. The neon sign outside the window buzzed faintly, flickering red against the wet pavement. A light rain had been falling for hours, not heavy enough to matter, but steady enough to make everything look colder than it really was. Maggie Lawson stood behind the counter, drying a coffee mug that was already clean. She was 28 years old, not old enough to feel this worn down, not young enough to pretend things would just fix themselves. The clock above the pie case read 9:42 p.m. Closing time was 10. There were only 2 customers left, a truck driver near the window, hunched over a plate of meatloaf, and an elderly woman nursing the same cup of tea she'd been stirring for nearly an hour. Maggie's shift had started at 6 that morning. Her feet hurt in that dull, familiar way, not sharp pain, just constant, like a reminder. She hadn't checked her bank account in 3 days. She already knew what it would say. The diner was called Rosie's, though Rosie had retired years ago. The new owner kept the name because the regulars liked it. Maggie liked it too. It felt warm, safe, even when her life didn't. She glanced at her phone on the counter. 1 missed call, unknown number, probably another bill collector. She turned the screen face down. The bell above the door jingled softly. Maggie looked up automatically, forcing the polite smile she'd perfected over the years. But the smile faded before it fully formed. A man stepped inside, shaking rain from his jacket. He looked to be in his late 40s, maybe early 50s. It was hard to tell. His coat was worn thin at the elbows. His jeans were damp. His shoes, not much left to them. He hesitated just inside the doorway, like he wasn't sure he was allowed to be there. Maggie felt something shift in her chest. She'd seen that look before. Not anger, not entitlement, just hesitation. "Evening," she said gently. He nodded once. "Evening." His voice was low, careful. He walked to the last booth near the wall, the one farthest from the windows, not hiding, just keeping to himself. Maggie grabbed a menu and walked over. Up close, she noticed the small details. His beard wasn't wild, just untrimmed. His hair needed a cut. His hands were clean but rough, like someone who used to work with them. There was something steady about his eyes. Not desperate, just tired. "You want some coffee?" she asked. "If that's all right." "It's always all right." She poured him a cup without asking if he wanted cream or sugar. Something told her he'd take it black. He did. He didn't open the menu right away. Instead, he wrapped both hands around the mug, letting the heat settle into his fingers. The truck driver finished up and paid. The elderly woman left with a soft thank you. Now it was just Maggie and the man in the booth. The rain outside grew a little heavier. Maggie leaned lightly against the counter, watching without staring. After a few minutes, she walked back over. "You ready to order?" He glanced at the menu like he'd just remembered it was there. "How much is the chicken sandwich?" $8.99. He nodded slowly. "And the soup?" $4.50. Another pause. "I'll just stick with the coffee." Maggie didn't respond right away. She wasn't surprised. She'd seen that math happen before. The quiet calculation of what you can afford versus what you need. "You sure?" she asked gently. He gave a small, embarrassed smile. "Coffee's fine." She nodded once. "All right." She walked back to the counter. Her stomach tightened. She opened the register, pretending to count bills. She had $12 in her apron pocket. Her tips from the afternoon shift. That was it. $12 until Friday. 3 days away. Her rent was already late. Her car needed a new battery. Her younger brother, Tyler, had texted that morning asking if she could help with groceries, again. She'd told him she'd try. Maggie closed the register. The man hadn't touched his coffee again. He was staring at the wall but not really seeing it. The diner felt very small suddenly, very quiet. She grabbed a bowl, ladled hot chicken noodle soup into it, added crackers on the side. Then she plated the chicken sandwich. She carried everything to his table and set it down carefully. He blinked at the food. "It's all right," she said quickly. "You can pay for the coffee." He looked at her like he wasn't sure if he'd heard correctly. "I don't want trouble. You're not trouble." A long pause. "I don't have enough. I know." The words hung there between them. He stared at the soup like it might disappear. "You don't have to do that," he said quietly. Maggie shrugged, keeping her tone light. I already made it. Can't waste it. That wasn't true, but it was easier than saying what she really meant. He swallowed. Thank you. She nodded and walked away before the moment could turn heavy. Back behind the counter, she leaned both hands against the surface. Her heart was beating harder than it should have. It wasn't a grand gesture. It wasn't dramatic. It was just food. But for her, it was $10. Her last $10. She listened to the quiet sounds from the booth, the clink of a spoon, the soft tear of bread, slow eating, careful eating, like someone who didn't know when the next meal would be. She didn't look at him again, not because she didn't want to, but because kindness sometimes felt easier without eye contact. 10 minutes later, he stood. He walked to the counter, placing exact change for the coffee beside the register. He hesitated again. What's your name? He asked. Maggie. He nodded once. Thank you, Maggie. You're welcome. He opened the door and cold air slipped in. Then he was gone, just another shadow in the rain. Maggie stared at the $10 bill in her apron pocket. She took it out slowly, looked at it, then walked back to the register and slid it into the drawer. She rang up the soup and sandwich under her employee number, paid for it herself. The drawer closed with a soft click. That was that. No music swelled, no one clapped, no one even knew. At 10 o'clock sharp, she turned off the neon sign. The diner fell into darkness except for the small light above the counter. She locked the door. The rain had stopped. The pavement glistened under the streetlights. Maggie pulled her jacket tighter around her and walked toward her old Honda parked under the flickering lamp post. She sat inside for a moment before starting the engine. It didn't turn over on the first try. Her chest tightened. Come on, she whispered. The second try worked. She let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. As she drove home, she replayed the evening in her head. Not with regret, just with quiet awareness. She knew what it meant to count pennies. She knew what it meant to pretend you weren't hungry. She also knew that sometimes one small moment could keep someone going. Still, $10 was $10. She pulled into her apartment complex. The building looked tired, paint peeling near the stairwell, one hallway light out again. Inside her apartment, the fridge hummed too loudly in the silence. She opened it. Half a carton of eggs, one apple, some mustard. That was about it. She closed it gently, sat down at the small kitchen table. The room felt bigger than usual, lonelier. Her phone buzzed, a text from Tyler. You okay? She stared at it for a long moment, then typed back. Yeah, just tired. She didn't mention the $10. She didn't mention the man. She didn't mention that her stomach was growling now. Instead, she filled a glass with tap water and drank it slowly. Outside, somewhere down the street, a dog barked. A car door slammed. Life moving on. Maggie rested her head against the cool kitchen wall. She didn't feel heroic. She didn't feel foolish either. She just felt quiet, like something small but important had passed through her hands and into the world. And she had no idea what it would become. A week from now, she wouldn't be thinking about the $10. She wouldn't be expecting anything. But tonight, as she turned off the light and lay in bed staring at the ceiling, one thought drifted through her mind. She hoped he had somewhere dry to sleep. And for reasons she couldn't explain, she hoped she'd see him again. 3 days after the man in the rain, Maggie's car wouldn't start. It happened in the diner parking lot just after sunrise. The sky was pale and colorless, like it hadn't fully decided to become morning. Maggie slid into the driver's seat of her old Honda and turned the key. Click. Nothing. She tried again. Click. The dashboard lights flickered weakly and then went dark. She rested her forehead against the steering wheel. Not today, she whispered. But it was today. Her shift started in 15 minutes. She stepped back out into the cold air and stood there for a second, staring at the car like it had betrayed her personally. The parking lot was mostly empty. A delivery truck was unloading crates near the back door of the diner. She checked her phone. $7.43 in her bank account. That was it. Her next paycheck was still 2 days away, and even that wouldn't stretch far once rent took its share. She thought about the $10, not with regret exactly, just with the simple math of it. $10 would have covered a ride home last night, maybe even a cheap battery from the junkyard if she was lucky. She closed her eyes for a second, then she walked inside. Sam, the morning cook, was already flipping pancakes behind the counter. He was in his early 50s, thick mustache, soft eyes. He'd worked at Rosie's longer than anyone. "You're early," he said without looking up. "My car's dead." "That thing again?" "Yeah." He slid a pancake onto a plate and finally glanced at her. "Battery? Probably," he grunted. "You need a jump?" She hesitated. "Yeah, if you don't mind." "Course I don't mind." He finished the order, wiped his hands on a towel, and followed her outside. 10 minutes later, the Honda coughed back to life. "Don't turn it off till you get home," he said. "Thank you. You gotta get that fixed, Maggie." "I know." She did know. But knowing and affording were two different things. The morning rush came and went in a blur of coffee refills and eggs over easy. Maggie moved automatically, smiling when needed, listening when customers talked about weather or traffic or nothing at all. But underneath it, a quiet pressure built. Bills stacked on her kitchen counter. Tyler's text from yesterday asking if she could help with his electric bill, the car, the rent, and somewhere in the back of her mind, the memory of the man in the booth holding that bowl of soup like it mattered. Around noon, her phone buzzed again in her apron. She stepped into the hallway near the restroom to check it. Unknown number. Again, she almost ignored it. Almost. But something made her answer. "Hello?" A pause. Then a woman's voice, calm and professional. "Is this Maggie Lawson?" "Yes." "This is Linda from Fairview Apartments. We've sent 2 notices about your rent." Maggie closed her eyes. "I know. I just need a little more time. It's already been 2 weeks, Maggie. I get paid Friday. We'll need at least half by then." "Half." She did the math quickly in her head. Half meant she'd have maybe $20 left for the next 2 weeks. "I'll bring it," she said. There was a pause on the other end. "We can't extend again." "I understand." When she hung up, she stayed in the hallway for a moment longer than necessary. The fluorescent light above her buzzed faintly. She felt small in that narrow space. Not hopeless. Just tired. Very tired. She went back to work. By late afternoon, her smile felt thinner. Around 6, Tyler showed up at the diner. He was 21, tall and lanky, wearing the same hoodie he'd owned since high school. He slid into a booth near the counter. "You look exhausted," he said. "Thanks. I mean it. I know." She poured him coffee without asking. He stared at the menu but didn't open it. "You eat today?" she asked. He shrugged. She didn't wait for him to order. She brought him a burger and fries, on the house. Sam pretended not to notice. "You didn't have to," Tyler said quietly. "I know." He looked at her carefully. "You okay?" "Yeah." He didn't believe her. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a crumpled $20 bill. "Take it." She shook her head immediately. "No. I got paid yesterday. You need it. So do you. I'm fine." She slid the bill back toward him. He pushed it again. "Maggie." She looked at him. Really looked at him. Her little brother, who'd grown too fast and still tried to act older than he was. She softened. "Keep it, please." He hesitated, then slowly tucked it back into his hoodie pocket. "You always do this," he said. "Do what? Act like you—" "We're not drowning." She gave him a small smile. "I'm not drowning." But that wasn't entirely true. Later that night, after Tyler left and the dinner crowd thinned out, Maggie stepped outside for air. The sky was clear now, cold. She leaned against the brick wall beside the diner and let the silence settle. She thought about the man again. Not because she expected anything, just because something about him had lingered. The way he'd said her name, the steadiness in his voice. It hadn't felt like gratitude alone. It had felt like recognition, as if he understood something about her without asking. She shook the thought away. People passed through diners every day, stories brushed against each other and moved on. That's how life worked. By Thursday, her car died again, this time on the side of the road halfway home. She sat behind the wheel with hazard lights blinking and let her hands rest in her lap. Cars passed. No one stopped. She didn't blame them. After 15 minutes, she called a tow truck. The driver told her the battery wasn't the only issue. Alternator might be going too. "It'll cost you," he said plainly. She nodded like she expected nothing else. That night, her apartment felt colder than usual. She wrapped herself in a blanket and sat on the floor beside her bed instead of on it. Her fridge was nearly empty. She ate the last egg scrambled in a pan with no butter. Her stomach still felt hollow afterward. For a brief, flickering second, she thought about that bowl of soup again, how warm it had looked, how carefully he'd eaten it. She could have used that $10 now. She could have used a lot of things, but even in tea, the quiet hunger of her apartment, she didn't regret it. That surprised her. She should have. Anyone would have understood. Yet when she closed her eyes, what she remembered wasn't the money, it was the look on his face when the food touched the table. Not shock, not relief exactly, something softer, like dignity being returned. Friday morning arrived heavy. Payday. She picked up her check before her shift and opened it in the supply closet. It was smaller than she'd hoped. Taxes, reduced hours from the slow week. She folded it carefully and slipped it into her apron. Half would go straight to rent. The rest would barely cover the car. She worked her shift in a quiet haze, refilling coffee, wiping counters, smiling, always smiling. By closing time, her feet felt numb. She locked the door and stood for a moment in the empty diner. The booths were still. The air smelled faintly of grease and coffee grounds. She wondered briefly where the man was tonight. If he was warm, if he had found something steady. She told herself it didn't matter. Kindness wasn't alone. It didn't come back with interest. It just moved forward, still. As she stepped into the night air and pulled her jacket tight, there was a small, unspoken question sitting quietly in her chest. Not hope, not expectation, just curiosity. And somewhere far from the diner, though she didn't know it yet, that week had meant something to someone else, too. The following Tuesday started like any other. Gray sky, thin wind, the kind of morning that made the world feel unfinished. Maggie arrived early because Sam had the flu, and the owner needed her to open. She borrowed her neighbor's car for the week after promising to pay for gas she couldn't really afford. She moved through the quiet diner alone, turning on lights one by one. The neon sign buzzed awake. Coffee brewed. The first smell of the day rose into the air. For a few minutes it was peaceful. Just the low hum of the refrigerator and the soft scrape of chairs as she straightened them. She tied her apron slowly, smoothing the fabric like it mattered. At 6:12 a.m., the bell above the door rang, too early for the usual regulars. She looked up automatically, and for a split second she didn't recognize him. The man standing just inside the doorway was clean-shaven, his hair was trimmed neatly, his posture was different, not rigid but steady in a new way. He wore a dark charcoal suit, not flashy, not loud, just well-fitted. His shoes were polished, and in his hand was a leather briefcase. Maggie blinked once, then twice. Something in her chest tightened. It was his eyes that gave him away. Steady, careful, the same eyes that had wrapped around a coffee mug 1 week earlier. He gave her a small nod. "Morning, Maggie." Her throat went dry. "Morning." He stepped fully inside, letting the door close behind him. The suit didn't look like a costume. It looked lived in, comfortable. He walked to the same booth near the wall, sat down the same way, like nothing had changed. But everything had. Maggie stood still for half a second longer than she should have. Then she grabbed a mug and walked over. "Coffee?" she asked. "If you don't mind." His voice was the same, low, even. She poured it carefully. Up close, she could see it more clearly now. The man had always carried himself with a kind of quiet dignity. The worn clothes last week hadn't hidden that. She just hadn't thought about it at the time. "You look different," she said before she could stop herself. A faint smile touched his mouth. "So do you." She frowned slightly. "I'm still in the same apron." "Yes," he said gently. "But you look tired." She let out a small breath. "That's fair." Silence settled between them, but it wasn't awkward. He looked around the diner slowly, taking it in. "The place hasn't changed," he said. "It's only been a week." He nodded. "Feels longer." She hesitated. "You disappeared." "I did." She waited for more. None came. The bell above the door rang again. A regular walked in, nodded at Maggie, and took his usual seat by the window. Maggie glanced back at the man in the booth. "I'll be right back." He nodded. She served the regular quickly, her movements slightly unsteady. Her mind kept replaying the image of him in the rain, the thin jacket, the worn shoes, now the suit, the briefcase. When she returned to his table, he hadn't touched his coffee yet. "Can I get you anything?" she asked. "Yes." He met her eyes fully now. "I'd like the chicken sandwich." Her breath caught. And the soup. The words landed softly, but they carried weight. She gave a small nod. Okay. As she walked back toward the kitchen, her hands trembled slightly. Not from fear, not from anger, just confusion. Sam wasn't there to ask questions. The owner hadn't arrived yet. The diner felt strangely suspended in time. She prepared the soup carefully, toasted the bread evenly, added extra pickles to the plate without thinking. When E carried the food over, he looked at it the same way he had last week. Slowly, respectfully. You remembered, he said quietly. I always remember orders, she replied. But they both knew that wasn't what he meant. He picked up the spoon, took a bite, closed his eyes briefly. She stood there longer than necessary. Finally, she asked the question that had been pressing against her ribs. Were you? She didn't finish the sentence. He saved her from it. No, he said calmly. I'm not homeless. The word felt sharp, in the air. She swallowed. I didn't assume. I know. He set the spoon down carefully. I needed a week, he continued, to see something clearly. She frowned slightly. To see what? He leaned back in the booth, studying her the way someone studies a horizon before deciding where to walk. Kindness, he said simply. Maggie blinked. That's not something you test. No, he agreed. It isn't. The regular by the window cleared his throat loudly for more coffee. She glanced away for a second, then back. You're confusing me. A small breath left him. That's fair, too. She hesitated, then slid into the booth across from him for just a second. Something she never did during shifts. What's going on? She asked quietly. He folded his hands on the table. My name is Daniel Harper. The name didn't mean anything to her. She nodded slowly. Okay. I grew up 2 blocks from here, he continued. My mother worked in this diner when it was still owned by Rosie. Maggie felt a flicker of surprise. She did? She did. She worked double shifts, saved every tip she could. She kept this place afloat during some hard years. He glanced around again. She passed away last winter. Something in his voice shifted slightly at that. Not dramatic, just softer. I'm sorry, Maggie said. He nodded once. Thank you. Silence stretched between them again. I came back last week, he said. Not to test you. Not really. I came back because I wanted to remember what this place felt like. He paused. And I wanted to know if it still felt the same. Maggie's brow furrowed. And it did. He met her eyes fully now. Because of you. Her stomach flipped. That doesn't make sense. It does. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a thin folder, placed it gently on the table. She stared at it. I don't understand. I own 3 restaurants in the city, he said calmly. And a small hospitality group. The words landed quietly. No bragging, no pride, just fact. I was considering buying this diner. The room felt suddenly smaller. Buying it. Yes. Why? Because it matters. He slid the folder slightly closer to her. I met with the current owner yesterday. Maggie's pulse quickened. What does that have to do with me? Everything, he said softly. She looked down at the folder but didn't touch it. I watched you last week, he continued. Not just with me, with everyone. The truck driver, the older woman, your brother. Her breath caught. You noticed him. I notice a lot. She felt exposed suddenly. Not judged. Just seen. You paid for my meal, he said quietly. When you couldn't afford it. She stiffened. You don't know that. I do. How? Because I asked. Her face flushed. You had no right. I didn't ask you, he clarified, gentle. Why? I asked the owner. That stopped her. And he told you. He told me you rang it up under your employee number. The memory of the register drawer clicking shut came back sharply. She looked away. It wasn't a big deal. It was. No, she insisted softly. It wasn't. Daniel studied her for a long moment. Do you know what most people would have done? She didn't answer. They would have looked away, pretended not to see. She swallowed. I didn't do anything special. No, he agreed. You didn't. The words confused her again. He continued. You did something normal, human. And that's exactly why it mattered. She stared at the folder again. What's in that? A proposal. For what? For you to manage this diner. The words hit like quiet thunder. I don't have experience managing. You have experience caring. That's not the same thing. It is here. She shook her head slightly. This isn't funny. I'm not joking. He slid the folder fully in front of her now. I'm buying Rosie's. The paperwork is nearly done. I don't want to change the name. I don't want to turn it into something polished and cold. He paused. I want it to stay what it is. Her voice barely came out. And you think I can do that? I know you can. She looked around the diner. The cracked vinyl booths, the chipped coffee mugs, the place that had kept her afloat, barely. Her hands felt cold. I'm just a waitress, she whispered. He shook his head gently. No. You're the reason this place still feels like home. The bell above the door rang again. Another customer stepped in, life continuing. Maggie looked back at Daniel. A week ago, she had given him her last $10 without expecting anything. Now he sat across from her in a suit, offering her something she had never even imagined asking for. It didn't feel like a miracle. It felt like standing at the edge of something she wasn't sure she deserved. She placed her hand lightly on the folder. Didn't open it yet. I need time, she said quietly. Daniel nodded. Take it. He stood slowly, leaving cash on the table for the meal. This time more than enough, but not in a showy way, just precise. He picked up his briefcase. I'll be back tomorrow, he said. Then he paused. And Maggie? She looked up. Yes? You changed more than you think. He walked toward the door. The bell rang softly as it closed behind him. Maggie sat alone in the booth for a long moment. Her reflection stared back at her from the darkened window. Still in the same apron, still tired, but something inside her had shifted. Not hope, not yet, just possibility, and it felt heavier than she expected. Maggie didn't open the folder until after closing. All day it sat behind the counter near the register. She moved around it like it was fragile, or dangerous. She worked through the lunch rush with her usual quiet focus, poured coffee, cleared plates, smiled when needed. But everything felt slightly out of place, like the world had tilted a few degrees and hadn't warned her. Daniel didn't come back that day. He had said tomorrow. That gave her too much time to think. Around 3 in the afternoon, the owner, Mr. Collins, came in from the back office. He was in his early 60s, always wearing suspenders that looked older than the diner itself. He leaned against the counter. He talked to you. It wasn't a question. Maggie nodded slowly. You knew? She asked. Since Sunday. She blinked. And you didn't tell me. He asked me not to. She stared at him. You're really selling? Mr. Collins looked around the diner the way Daniel had. I'm tired, Maggie. Been tired a long time. She didn't know what to say to that. He's offering a fair price, he continued. More than fair. And you're just letting it go. I can't carry it forever. The words landed quietly. She thought about that. About carrying things longer than you're meant to. Mr. Collins nodded toward the folder. You should read it. I will. He means it, you know. Means what? About you. She felt her face warm. I'm not qualified. He gave her a small, almost amused look. You've been running this place for 2 years already. You just don't have the title. That stopped her. I just take orders. You handle complaints. You train new staff. You calm down suppliers when payments are late. He paused. You think I don't notice? Maggie didn't answer. Because part of her had never seen those things as management. They were just necessary. Mr. Collins sighed. I didn't tell him to pick you. You didn't? No. He straightened his suspenders. He chose you on his own. After he left, the diner felt quieter than usual. By closing time, her nerves felt stretched thin. She locked the front door, turned off the neon sign, let the silence settle. Then she carried the folder to her usual booth, the one near the wall. The same one. She sat down slowly. For a moment, she just stared at it. Her name was written neatly on the front, in black ink. Maggie Lawson. Her fingers hovered over it before finally opening it. Inside were papers. Structured, clear, not overwhelming. A management contract, salary details, health benefits, profit sharing after the first year. Her breath caught slightly. It was more money than she had ever made, not extravagant, but stable. There was also a handwritten note clipped to the top page. She unfolded it carefully. Maggie, I'm not offering you this because you were kind to me. I'm offering it because you are consistent. You treat every person who walks through that door like they matter. That's rare. This place shaped my childhood. I want it shaped by someone who understands what that means. Take your time. Daniel. She read it twice, then a third time. Her throat felt tight. It would solve so many things. The rent, the car, Tyler's bills, food that didn't come from counting coins. But the weight of it scared her. What if she failed? What if the diner changed under her and she didn't even realize it? What if she accepted and couldn't live up to whatever he thought he saw? She closed the folder slowly. The booth creaked softly as she leaned back. A week ago, she had felt small and tired but certain about who she was. Now she felt uncertain in a different way. Bigger, somehow, but unsteady. That night in her apartment, she placed the folder on the kitchen table. The fridge was still mostly empty. The rent envelope sat beside it. She ran her hand over both. Her phone buzzed. Tyler, you home? Yeah. He showed up 10 minutes later with a grocery bag. I got paid again, he said quickly before she could protest. And? Don't argue. He placed bread, milk, pasta, and canned soup on the counter. She stared at it. You shouldn't. I know. He leaned against the wall. You look weird. Thanks. No, I mean, different. She hesitated. Then she told him, not everything at once, just enough. A guy came back. The one I told you about. The coffee guy? Yeah. And he wants me to manage the diner. Tyler blinked. What? He's buying it. He stared at her for a long second. Is this a joke? No. Silence filled the kitchen. That's good, right? I don't know. He frowned. How is that not good? She sat down slowly. It's a lot. Of money, of responsibility. Tyler walked over and pulled out the chair across from her. You've been responsible since you were 16, he said quietly. That's different. How? She didn't answer right away, because she didn't have a clean answer. Tyler leaned forward. You gave that guy your last $10. She looked at him sharply. You knew. I know you. He shrugged slightly. You don't do things halfway. She looked down at her hands. I didn't do it to get anything. I know. And what if I take this and people think I did? Tyler stared at her. Who cares what they think? She let out a soft breath. I care. He shook his head gently. Maggie, you think too much about what you deserve. That stayed with her long after he left. The next morning she arrived at the diner, early again. Daniel was already there, sitting in the same booth. No briefcase this time, just coffee. He stood when she approached. You read it. Yes, and... She slid into the seat across from him. Her heart beat steadily now, not panicked, just honest. Why me? She asked again. He didn't hesitate. Because you don't see this as an opportunity to climb. You see it as something to protect. She studied his face. You don't know me that well. I know enough. She looked down at the table. If I say yes, things will change. Some things have to. I don't want this place to turn into something polished and cold. It won't. You can't promise that. No, he admitted. But you can. The words settled between them. You'd still own it, she said quietly. Yes. So technically, it would still be yours. He shook his head gently. It would be ours. That word felt bigger than it should have. She looked around the diner. A regular laughed near the counter. Coffee steamed in mugs. The bell rang as someone else entered. Life. Simple. Ordinary. She thought about the $10 again. Not the money. The moment. She hadn't helped him because she expected anything. She had helped him because she couldn't not help him. That part of her hadn't changed. Maybe this wasn't about deserving. Maybe it was about continuing. She looked back at Daniel. I don't want special treatment. You won't get it. I don't want this because of one night. It's not because of one night. She held his gaze. And if I fail, then we fix it. The word we felt steady, not romantic, not dramatic, just shared. She sat with that for a long moment. The fear was still there. but it didn't feel paralyzing anymore. It felt manageable, like something she could carry. Finally, she nodded. "I'll do it." Daniel didn't smile wide, didn't clap. He just deaded once, like he had expected nothing else. Okay. And in that quiet exchange, something shifted again. Not her circumstances yet, not the money, just her sense of herself. For the first time in a long time, Maggie didn't feel like she was barely holding things together. She felt like she was stepping into something, carefully, but willingly. And that felt different. The first morning, Maggie unlocked the diner as its manager. Nothing looked different. The neon sign still flickered. One of the counter stools still wobbled. The coffee machine still made that soft grinding sound before it settled into its steady hum. If someone had walked in without knowing, they wouldn't have noticed anything had changed. But Maggie noticed. The key felt heavier in her hand, not because it weighed more, because it meant more. She stood inside for a quiet moment before turning on the lights. The early light from outside filtered through the windows, pale and gentle. Dust floated in the air like it always had. She didn't feel triumphant. She felt responsible. Daniel hadn't made a big announcement. There was no ribbon cutting, no press, just paperwork signed in Mr. Collins' back office and a handshake that lasted a second longer than usual. Mr. Collins hugged her before he left for the last time. "Don't let them rush you," he said softly. "I won't," and then he was gone. Sam had taken the news better than she expected. "So I gotta call you boss now?" He'd teased. "Please don't," he grinned. "Good." The first week was slow and quiet. Maggie didn't change the menu, didn't repaint the walls, didn't polish the worn spots out of existence. She fixed what needed fixing, replaced the broken hallway light, called someone to repair the freezer that had been making noise for months. She sat down with the staff one afternoon and asked them what they thought the diner needed. No speeches, just listening. "More hours," one waitress said. "Better scheduling," another added. Sam just shrugged. "Keep the coffee strong." Maggie wrote everything down in a small notebook. At night, she still went home to the same apartment. But something subtle had shifted there too. The fridge wasn't empty anymore. The rent envelope didn't sit unopened on the table. She paid the mechanic to fix her car properly instead of hoping it would survive another week. She gave Tyler money without pretending she didn't have it. The relief was quiet. It didn't explode into happiness. It settled like warm air filling a room. Daniel didn't hover. He came by twice that first week, sat in the booth, drank coffee, observed. The second time, he stayed after closing. They sat across from each other in the dim light of the diner. "You're not changing it," he said. "Was I supposed to?" He shook his head gently. "No." She studied him for a moment. "Why did you really come back that night?" she asked. He leaned back slightly. "My mother used to tell me something," he said. She'd say, "You can tell who someone is by how they treat a stranger who can't give them anything." Maggie felt that settle in her chest. "I wasn't trying to prove anything. I know." He looked around the diner. "When I walked in that first night, I was remembering her. I wasn't testing you." He paused. "But when you brought that soup out, it felt like she was still here." The words weren't dramatic. They were almost fragile. Maggie didn't know what to say to that. So she didn't. She just nodded. A few weeks passed. Business picked up slowly. Not because of advertising, not because of renovations. Word just traveled. Customers noticed small things. The way Maggie remembered names. The way she sometimes slid a slice of pie onto a plate without charging someone who looked like they needed it. She didn't advertise that policy. She just kept $10 tucked in the register now. Her own quiet system. One afternoon, a teenage girl came in alone. Ordered only water. Maggie recognized the look. The quiet math. She brought out a grilled cheese sandwich and set it down. "It was extra," she said lightly. The girl's eyes filled slightly. "Thank you." Maggie just nodded. It wasn't charity. It was continuity. Later that evening, Daniel walked in and caught the tail end of it. He didn't say anything. Just watched. When the girl left, he approached the counter. "You started a tab for kindness," he said softly. Maggie gave him a small look. "It's not a tab. What is it?" She thought about that. "It's just making sure nobody sits here and feels invisible." Daniel nodded slowly. "That's exactly what I hoped. There was no grand celebration when the first quarter profits came in stronger than expected. No champagne. Maggie sat alone at one of the booths after closing, looking at the numbers. Stable. Sustainable. She ran her finger over the paper. A month ago, she had been counting coins for groceries. Now she was balancing payroll. It didn't feel like a fairy tale. It felt like work, steady, earned work. One evening, just as the sun was setting, Tyler came in wearing a collared shirt instead of his usual hoodie. "You look important," Maggie teased. "I have an interview," he said. "Where?" "Warehouse supervisor." She smiled. "Look at you." He glanced around the diner. "You really did this." "We did." He shook his head. "No, you did." She leaned over the counter. "You remember what you told me?" "What?" "That I think too much about what I deserve." He smirked slightly. "Still true." She laughed softly. "But maybe deserving isn't the point," she said. "Then what is?" She looked around the diner. Sam arguing playfully with a couple sharing pie near the window, the neon sign buzzing to life as dusk settled. "Showing up," she said quietly. Tyler studied her for a second. "Yeah," he agreed. "You've always been good at that." Late one night, long after closing, Maggie stayed behind to finish paperwork. The diner was dim. The booth near the wall sat empty. She walked over and slid into it, ran her hand over the worn table. She could still see it in her mind. The rain outside, the man holding the coffee mug, the decision that had felt so small, so simple. $10. It hadn't changed her life because it was money. It had changed it because it was who she already was. Daniel walked in quietly. She hadn't heard the bell. "Still working?" he asked. "Almost done." He stood near the booth. "Do you regret it?" he asked. "The job? The soup?" She didn't hesitate. "Oh." He nodded. "Neither do I." They sat in the quiet for a moment. Not as strangers. Not exactly as business partners either. Just two people who had met at a crossroads neither of them expected. "You know," she said softly, "if you'd never come back, I still wouldn't regret it." He looked at her carefully. "I know. That was the part that mattered most." The return hadn't created the meaning. It had only revealed it. Eventually, he left. Maggie turned off the lights one by one, locked the door, stepped out into the cool night air. The pavement wasn't wet this time. The sky was clear. She stood there for a moment, breathing in the quiet. A week ago, she had felt like she was barely keeping her head above water. Now she felt steady. Not rich, not rescued, just steady. And sometimes that was enough.